Welcome to RealClearPolitics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan. We are broadcasting from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library at the first annual Reagan National Economic Forum. And we are pleased to be here and pleased to be joined by our first guest, Joe Lonsdale. Joe is the president and managing partner of 8VC, which is a venture capital firm, and one of the original founders of Palantir. Joe, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Great backdrop for this with Reagan's plane.
It's amazing.
Tom and I took a tour of it. It's small. That's what people don't realize.
Yeah,
it looks big, but
it's a 707.
Not as big as your plane.
Not as big as the one Donald Trump wants to buy.
That's true.
But Joe, so you're on the board here, and you were instrumental in putting this together. So give us a little bit of the background on this being the first one. What was the idea, and how it came to pass?
So every year we have the Defense Forum here, which has become the top defense event in the country at the Reagan Library, and it was all the top players in that come. And we realized this is a great place for an economic forum as well. Ronald Reagan obviously had very clear, strong economic principles that are still relevant today. And I think a lot of us wanted a competitor to Davos that had a different point of view, maybe a more freedom-oriented version of the World Economic Forum. And it's amazing. We've had a bunch of the top CEOs and economists and everyone show up. So it's a really great group.
It has been an amazing turnout. We just saw, well, they called it a fireside chat. Jamie Dimon was here. Gary Cohn was on a panel. I mean, there's some very, very impressive folks here discussing all sorts of things, from competition with China to AI to populism. And you're actually going to be talking a little bit later to Mark Andreessen.
That's right. He has some really strong economic opinions these days, which will be entertaining. It's what do we do to copy McKinley and his tariffs, and what do we change based on what's going on? Because in our country right now, for a long time it was a manufacturing-based economy, then it was a services-based economy. Mark believes we're now into a new AI-based economy. What does that mean for policy? It's a fun question.
Well, one thing I hope you'll ask him: if AI puts 80 million Americans out of work, how's the populist wave we're in now survive such a thing?
It's a really interesting question of how quickly that happens and what happens alongside it, right? Because we're overlooking here some beautiful farmland down below us, and in the old days, it took 20 times as many people working on those farms, and I think we're all happy that it's not the case, that productivity has gone up a lot. And it's funny, if you actually want to attack us arrogant tech guys who think we're so great for all the things we're doing, you might say, like Joe, productivity hasn't gone up very much at all the last 30 years. You think you're changing everything, and you're just distracting people with this stuff. Like tech's only gone up 1 or 2% a year. If you actually get productivity going up 3, 4, 5% a year, that solves the debt problems. It causes disinflation. I mean, this would solve so many things. And so you're right. There's a give and take where you don't want everyone out of work at once, but we desperately need productivity to go up in this economy.
Well, so in your opinion, what is the time horizon for this stuff? I mean, we had this piece in Axios last week. We talked about it on the show, basically saying, look, this is going to happen in the next 1 to 3 years, that you'll have 20% of the workforce put out of work. And there was another piece that we talked about, which was written by Joel Kotkin, which talked about because right now AI is helping people do their jobs, but very quickly it'll replace those jobs, and a lot of those are sort of well-educated. It would create a sort of democratic underclass, right? The guy who fixes your pipes is not going to be replaced by AI, but the journalist, the podcaster, maybe, some of these folks in the information space, they're the ones who might be hit hardest.
I think eventually this goes into all sectors, but the question you asked, we've been through these waves a few times, right? And so you had the whole internet wave, the internet boom, it was a giant bubble. And whenever people are in the middle of these bubbles, think back to 1998, 1999, when those things first really got going and the internet was really accelerating, it was like everything's going to change in the next 3 or 4 years. And you know what's interesting? All that new economy, new paradigm, remember we talked about new paradigm 25 years ago? That was actually right. It just took a lot longer than anyone thought. And listen, AI is going to change a lot of things pretty fast. I actually don't think it's going to show up in productivity as much as I would like it to. So it's funny, I'm on the other side of this thing where I'm worried it's not going to be fast enough. It's going to take a longer time because, the real world is just a complicated place. It's hard to put these things in. So is it going to start hitting different areas? 100%. But is it going to change everything in 3 years? I find that very unlikely. I think, if anything, the bigger battle is how do we get past the regulatory frameworks to actually let us improve productivity in healthcare, make healthcare cheaper for everyone? How do we allow ourselves to build things better so we can have cheaper products and goods for everyone? It's going to take a long time to be allowed to do these things. And so I'd be surprised if there's just massive job losses. That's not how I see it.
Can I ask you a question about what's going on in Silicon Valley, the political attitudes?
Sure.
So when I came to Washington as a young regional reporter for the San Jose Mercury News, Ronald Reagan was president then. There was one, as far as I know, there was one lobbyist in the whole city. His name was Ken Hagerty. I used to go to lunch with him regularly, and he, with what we called high tech. And those guys then were, we don't want anything from government, which is, they wanted the latest inventions from DARPA. But okay, they were sort of socially liberal guys, still are, believe in, pro-choice and all that.
Yeah, they're live and let live. We're building our own world. Don't bug us.
Right, but they were capitalists, and it seems that over the last generation that's changed. They become more like mainstream Democrats, give a lot of money to Democratic candidates. Is there a change going on now? Another change with the attitudes in Silicon Valley, where people are starting to go back to more Ronald Reagan's idea that famously said in his inaugural address, government right now is not the solution, it's the problem. Is there any of that taking place among the tech sector?
Well, you have to realize what happened was, so first of all, you do have a lot of people on the frontier, very live and let live, very socially kind of like tolerant place. And a lot of the culture of these new big tech companies 20 years ago came out of the universities, right? All the Google hires were top people from universities. And so all of these big tech companies were basically cloning universities. Of course, they're going to be more on the left. And then more recently, in the last 10 years, we've started to do things in the tech world that intersect with big industries. And we started to say, okay, wow, this is a much better way. We can reduce this healthcare cost. This is a much better way. We could fix how this payment system works. And all of a sudden, you start seeing these companies like PayPal, where the regulator is coming in, and it's not just like a fair, normal regulation. It's a guy who's trying to make his career, in that case Spitzer, trying to destroy the company. And you get this story again and again and again, where suddenly everything we're trying to do in the real world is up against this like really powerful kind of crazy regulatory apparatus. We see in Europe how this regulatory apparatus actually killed our counterparts. Like there's nothing like these companies in Europe because the regulators are stronger. They couldn't get through them, and we barely survived getting through them, right? Spitzer came this close to killing PayPal, would have killed SpaceX, would have killed everything else. And so all of a sudden people see that and say, wait a second, this is not good. We need something that's more data-driven, more rational. We don't just want like all the power unchecked in these governing bodies. That's not fair. So you've kind of like red-pilled a lot of my friends by having this like government apparatus just be so overbearing. And yeah, it has shifted that way. But I think they're still very socially tolerant people.
That's right.
But I think they're very frustrated and annoyed at how broken and big and dumb our government is, which is the thing.
So we've got just a couple minutes left, Joe, and that leads me to a question I want to ask you about. So you write a Substack,
Yep.
which we actually ran your latest piece on RealClearPolitics, and the title of that was, "Our Schools Teach Our Kids to Love Socialism. Let's Teach Them Liberty."
I love it.
I mean, how much of this is an issue that starts very early on in our schools, and why is that important to be infusing them with educating them about liberty?
Yeah, the founders of our country very famously thought that the main purpose of public education was to help these kids understand liberty, help our citizens be citizens of a free republic. Thomas Jefferson said we have to show them how to live as free citizens, be civically active, and resist despotism. And it's ironic because nowadays the special interests have taken over public education. It's the opposite. They actually glorify socialism. They actually teach them very different values than we used to teach kids in public schools. And it's a problem because when you have all these young people getting these oppressor-oppressed narratives, they come out with very strange views. Like I'm Jewish through my mother's side, for example, and the average 18 to 24-year-old has a problem with Jews. You know why? It's a successful minority, and they've learned that success means you're an oppressor. And so you have the average person, they're having a big problem with you, which is terrible. Right? So you have all these crazy ideologies being put into our children through these special interests, and I think we have to resist that and teach them to think for themselves if we're going to have a free country.
Yeah.
Well, this anti-Semitism, Joe, I never thought I'd live to see what's happened in this country in the last last 2 years. Mm-hmm. But there was this tragic killing in Washington, D.C. of these two young people.
Yes.
But, so you're saying that doesn't begin at the universities. You seem to think that begins earlier in secondary education and even elementary school. So what's the mechanism for getting control of the narrative again?
Well, we have to change our schools. We passed a law in Texas that I helped write actually for the Cicero Institute, my policy group, last week, that requires, starting from grade 4 all the way up through grade 12, that you teach about the horrors of communism and the history of authoritarianism, and kind of give give kids this. And not only teaches about what happened in the past and how the lives were impacted and the millions dead, they kill all the landlords, then how it turns out badly, but also teaching after the Cold War ended, what did those activists do? How did they evolve? How did they become people who got involved in race politics to divide us as opposed to class politics to divide us? Because you see that today, right? So I think there's a lot of this education that people are missing, and they need those frameworks if they're going to resist the stuff we're seeing online.
All right. We've got it there. Got to leave it there. Joe Lonsdale, founder and managing partner of 8VC. Joe, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and now joined by Chairman Jodey Arrington, representative from the 19th Congressional District in Texas. Thank you Congressman, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's an honor to be with you. We refer to West Texas as the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world.
Okay, very good.
And the reason I was late is because we're so flat you can see your dog run away for 4 days, and we got so many hills out here. I'm sorry for running just a little late, but it's great to be with you all.
It's okay, no problem.
Well, there's one thing this area has in common with where you're from. If you notice those signs, when you go out in the back pavilion, those little signs that say, "This is rattlesnake country."
I did, and I've got the world's largest rattlesnake roundup in Sweetwater, Texas, in my district. So we digress, but
We do, and I should remind for those of you who are listening on SiriusXM or watching us on YouTube, we are broadcasting from the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California, at the first annual Reagan National Economic Forum. They do the Defense Forum here every year. It's become a big deal, and now they're starting this. As Joe Lonsdale, our last guest, said, as a competition or a competitor to Davos, although with a different perspective.
With a Texas flavor.
With a Texas flavor. And we are definitely going to have a Texas flavor on the show because we're having Rep. Beth Van Duyne on the show next. So, but Chairman, we got to talk about the big, beautiful bill.
yes.
Tell us about what went on, how you managed to get that done and get it through the House by a single vote, how difficult that was to craft something that could appease all the various parts of the Republican caucus.
Well, it was the most challenging endeavor of my political career. And I worked for President Bush for 10 years, and then I've been almost in the U.S. House for 10 years. But it was a situation where I think we needed to remind each other daily that failure was not an option. This was an historic moment, a generational opportunity to change course over the last 4 years, especially on the failed economic policies and unbridled spending of the last administration and what that did to our economy, cost of living, et cetera, but also making important investments in border security and defense. So I think the sense of urgency and meeting this moment was looming large over all of us, and then reminding folks that we're not any of us, any faction of us, any caucus going to get everything we want. I'm a budget hawk. You can't cut enough spending for me. I know what we're borrowing a day, $6 billion. I know what we're borrowing a year, almost $2 trillion. I know that will double in 10 years. I know we're spending more to service the debt than what we pay for all of our national defense. So I'm not going to be satisfied with whatever we end up in terms of spending, but to achieve almost $1.7 trillion, which is twice the largest amount of spending cuts in the history of our country, it's a start. We won't crawl out of this debt hole in one reconciliation bill. We're going to have to rinse and repeat this process for years, if not decades to come. So managing expectations and making sure that we're giving and taking in a way that moves it forward. And we were able to do that, as you said, with a 1-vote margin with the resolution, and then, of course, a 3-vote margin recently with all the policies that drive those budget targets.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of your compatriots from Texas, Chip Roy, has been one of the most outspoken, and he was very critical of the bill and wanted more cuts, and especially the Green New Deal spending. I think it was one of his main targets that we left. That there was a bunch of that left in this bill. how does he, see this when you talk to him and negotiate with him? I mean, is he still very unhappy with it, but it was just one of those things where you sort of grit your teeth?
I think that there's a wanting in the soul of every fiscal hawk, and Chip and I are both fiscal hawks. And then there's the pragmatic side of a budget chairman that understands that, the alternative is almost zero in terms of offsets. If we had to negotiate with Democrats on a tax bill, it wouldn't be transformational, and it certainly wouldn't be offset. And so you kind of have to look at the alternative too, and remind yourself of that reality. But Chip and other hawks on my committee and in our conference did a great job, and I was fighting right alongside of them. We needed to implement the work requirements faster than what came out of the Energy and Commerce policy, which was implementing common sense work requirements 4 years from now. I mean, we either believe in the dignity of work, and we either believe we need to change policies that are trapping people in dependence on the federal government and in a cycle of poverty, or we don't. So that improved because of Chip, I would say, and others, Ralph Norman and Andrew Clyde. I could list all of them. The other one was what you mentioned, the Green New Deal tax subsidies. The cost was $700 to $800 billion. And we needed to thoughtfully wind those down and repeal them in a way that we didn't jeopardize current projects and the investors and business folks who banked on the promise of the government. But as soon as we could wind them down, we should do that. We probably left a longer tail coming out of Ways and Means, but we were able to shorten that, phase it out in a more aggressive time frame, saving us money, but most importantly, reducing the risk of those tax cuts being extended, which, as Kevin Brady, former Ways and Means chairman, used to say, when I die, I want to come back as a tax credit because then I'll live forever. And so I think a lot of good work was done. A lot of rooting out of waste, fraud, and abuse, which I think is the first phase of entitlement reform. Obviously, there's a whole lot more to do, but here's the key. You've got to work on the numerator and the denominator when it comes to our nation's fiscal health. And I'm talking about debt to GDP, which is at World War levels right now. I think the major focus of this bill was on growth, with a minor focus on fiscal reforms. We offset the cost of defense, border, and the tax cuts. We do that with an assumption of 2.6 growth rate, which gives us $2.5 trillion over the budget window, plus the 1.6 or 7 trillion in cuts. When you get the growth that we're going to get from good energy policy, work incentives, good tax, deregulation, America First trade, we will exceed the 2.6% growth rate that we assumed in our reconciliation bill. That's lower than the annual average growth rate of Trump and Biden. So we did a conservative job there. We didn't include tariff revenues. The CBO scores just the 10% across the board over the 10-year window at $2.3 trillion. If Trump does the job I believe he will do and hold spending at least flat on discretionary, that's the annual appropriations process, that's another $1.5 trillion in spending reduction. So we are bending the curve on the deficit overall with the reconciliation bill, absent tariff revenue and all the other stuff. We bring the debt to GDP down by 10 percentage points, mainly because we're going to start growing faster than we're taking on debt and faster than inflation. So it's an important and meaningful step, but we got to do more.
You're listening to Jodey Arrington, chairman of the House Budget Committee. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, RealClearPolitics. Tom Bevan and I are here at the Reagan Library. Congressman, let me ask you a question about, sort of a more cosmic question about how the House works. You mentioned, you didn't want to have to negotiate with Democrats, but when Ronald Reagan was president, White House negotiated openly with Democrats, and they would count on their budget 25, 30 Democrats, half of them from Texas, but you had more of a consensus. that the country sort of understood. This was Congress speaking, not House Democrats or.
That's right.
But since Bill Clinton's first budget,
Yes.
it's just these are straight line party line votes, and so conservatives talk about it'd be nice to have some certainty in the markets. Well, one of the things that leads to uncertainty is this whipsaw effect when the House changes hands. Would it be better for your party to be able to talk to the other party and to have something? Maybe you're not going to get Bernie Sanders on board, but to get 40 or 50 people from each party to agree.
I love that question. I love that question because in the 50 years we've had this tool called budget reconciliation that gives us a simple majority vote in the Senate, right? That's the magic here.
Right.
Which gave the Democrats unilateral control to make decisions around budget matters, revenue dials, and mandatory spending dials, and now gives us unilateral control. I would say there's a lot of probably partisan work that needs to be done, quite frankly, to reverse the trillions of dollars in spending from the previous administration. I make no apologies for that. Reversing the student loan bailout and the hundreds of billions of dollars that were, I think, unconstitutionally spent, the monies that we expanded under executive order to illegal immigrants with respect to health care and welfare services. These programs are not even sustainable for our own citizens. I could go down the list of things that needed to be reversed that I don't think I'd get a single Democrat to help me with, which is kind of the baseline function of what we do in reconciliation. Now, in the long run, there are programs, and there are two in particular that make up 98% of the $125 trillion in unfunded liabilities. That's the cumulative debt that we're going to add on top of the $36 trillion World War level debt that we have today. We won't get there. And those programs are a function, or the deficit in those programs are a function of demographics. It's math. 10,000 baby boomers a day going on the safety net and not enough workers, et cetera, et cetera. I believe, like Reagan did with Tip O'Neill, we will have to get to a place where we rise above the partisan politics and actually deal with that together, and probably in a way that won't satisfy either party, but will solve the problem. And the biggest problem in terms of our fiscal sustainability. So I love that. You're right, Reagan did it. He did it in the 11th hour. To be fair, he's my hero, but let's put things in context. We have 8 years before our seniors in this country take a 20% cut, automatic. It's going to happen if we don't do something. Policies get worse. It's more expensive for taxpayers the longer we wait. So I'm a true believer in what you said, and quite frankly, reconciliation for the first half of the 50 years that it's been in existence was done on a bipartisan basis. And it was focused not on broad policy changes like Obamacare, but to be fair, or sweeping tax reform. It was used to reconcile the House budget and the Senate budget in a way that reduced the deficit. And they did it with revenue, probably to the chagrin of my Republicans back in the day, and with spending cuts, mandatory spending cuts, to the chagrin probably of my Democrat colleagues. But that's a way we operated for the sake of governing this great country. And you're right, we need to return to that, both in reconciliation and on these big deficits and unfunded liabilities within these very important entitlements that will not be sustainable if we don't address them.
All right, we got to leave it there. I got one. It's a one-word answer. Is the bill going to get done?
Yes,
And when will it get to the president's desk?
by July 4th.
July 4th. Okay, you heard it here. Chairman Jodey Arrington, Representative 19th District in Texas. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Great to be with you.
All
God
right.
bless.
Okay, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM, and we're going to take another quick break. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Carl Cannon. We are broadcasting from the Reagan National Library in Simi Valley at the first annual Reagan National Economic Forum. And we are joined in this segment by Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne. She is the representative It's an all Texas
I love
event
it
here.
so much.
24th,
So far.
yeah, so far. 24th Congressional District of Texas, which is in the Dallas area.
You fly into DFW Airport, you're in the center of the district.
Well, there we go.
Is Billy Bob's in your district?
No.
Oh,
What is Billy Bob's?
it's the world's greatest bar
Is that so?
and the biggest.
It's in
all
Fort
right.
Worth. It's pretty awesome, yeah.
Congresswoman, thank you for joining us. So I wanted to ask you, we saw you were on a panel earlier today talking about China and the competition with China. So just give our listeners a sense of your perspective on China and what we need to do there, how our policies can be improved or what we're not doing. Where do you think we stand vis-a-vis our relationship with China right now?
I don't think it's a strong relationship. I think it's a very adversarial relationship. I think we gave them the opportunity, several decades ago when we signed a free trade agreement with them, to play fair, to have access to our markets, to have access to our businesses. And what we've found is they've taken advantage of it. And now we're trying to get back on track. They stole our IP. They've infiltrated our universities, and they have taken every advantage to be able to move businesses, to China, and to find out more or less kind of a warfare without actually saying it's a war. And I think President Trump is very correct in saying we have got to get control of this sooner rather than later, and being very quick in his response on tariffs. And that's just one aspect of it, though. I think we have also been losing the trade game. China in the last 4 or 5 years, actually probably in the last 20 years, has really had an impact and an influence on other countries because it has come to the table. It has been able to put investments in places like Latin America, in the Middle East, in Africa, and it will own their future infrastructure. It owns access to their rare earth elements, much to the detriment of the future of the U.S. So I think getting to the table right now, that's something that I'm really active in working on. I'm on the trade subcommittee on Ways and Means, and we're going to be doing a lot with trade. We spoke with a new ambassador for trade, Jameson Greer, and they have a very active idea of what they want to be able to do. It's strategic. It's not just all military. You'd much rather have an economic relationship with these countries than to have an adversarial military relationship. China's got that early on. We need to come to the table.
Do you think the president made a mistake or by focusing on the EU and Canada and some of these other countries, these tariffs across the board, it diffused the message. If he had just said what you said about China, and we need to limit the playing field, and if they're not going to do what they said they're going to do, they're going to pay tariffs, and just that one country, do you think that would have been more effective?
No, I think he's playing chess, not checkers. We have a lot that
like
has
checkers.
to get done. Checkers is great. Checkers is great, but we don't have time for checkers right now. There's a lot to get done. I think what he realizes 4 years goes by really fast. During his first term, he had a whole plan for his second term. And not only did he have the first 4 years, but he had the next 4 years during the Biden administration to really kind of, tune that plan and to get people on board that recognize the goal and that they're all on the same page. So I think, he's walking and chewing gum at the same time. The tariff play is not just for China, but is an overall strategy to be able to combat China, recognizing the fact that, again, it's not just China that we're dealing with, it's their influence across the globe.
Well, he even said, the president said, NAFTA was abused by China because they're building cars in Mexico and in Canada and then bring them here. So
I got a level the playing field bill that aims to go after China. Just basically working around its tariffs. They found loopholes and everything, and going to Mexico, taking off the "Made in China" sticker, slapping on a "Made in Mexico" a sticker, and then being able to work in its products into the U.S. and avoiding tariffs. We got to stop that.
Chairman Arrington, we just heard from him, and we were talking about
one of my favorite Texans, by the way.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But Carl had asked him about sort of the way the House functions, and I'm curious from your perspective. From the outside, I think most people look at Washington, and the polling suggests they don't like Washington, right? Now, if you ask about their individual congressperson.
I was going to say, everybody hates Congress, but they love their congressman.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
It's a social phenomenon. Anyway, but it does seem to be dysfunctional. Is it really, when you're in those halls, when you're talking to Democrats, do Republicans still talk to Democrats? Are there
Have you always
areas-
thought that, or is this like something new? Like, have you always thought it was dysfunctional, or was it just the last?
I think it's been in my opinion. Now I follow it closer than probably most people.
Yeah.
But for your average American, I think they look at Washington and think it's just a disaster.
Yeah.
And I think the polling reflects that, even if they do like their individual congressperson. And I guess, so from your perspective, though, how much dysfunction is there? Are there areas or opportunities where Republicans and Democrats can actually work together to solve some of these big challenges and problems that we have?
So I got elected in 2020. So my first day of getting sworn in was January 3rd of 2021. Democrats had control of the House. We had to wear masks. We had magnetometers. We had January 6th happen 3 days after I got sworn in. It was very difficult as a Republican to get anything done. We got shot down every opportunity. They had the Congress, Capitol was shut down. You couldn't even get, meetings with your Congress member unless you were in the district or you left Capitol Hill. That was the dysfunction that I came into. We were having voting by proxy. We had members of Congress who had not even been in D.C. That was the level of dysfunction that I came into. 2 years later, we got a very narrow majority. We had Speaker Kevin McCarthy that was elected Speaker. We were able to get some of our bills done, but we had a Democrat president, we had a Democrat Senate. Very little was able to get out. Now we finally have an opportunity, I believe, to get some things done. Whether or not that's getting regulation out of our businesses, putting more dollars back in our families' lives. We should be able to do this bipartisan manner. And I will tell you, I'm part of the Reagan O'Neill Club. There's about 20 of us, 22 of us, half Democrats, half Republicans that actually do get together. I'm a former mayor. I'm a former local elected official. I didn't have an R or a D next to my name. Like, I only knew practicality. I didn't have any kind of platform that I had any allegiance to getting things done, which is why I started our mayor's caucus, which surprisingly, there's 34 of us on that, and about 17 Democrats, 17 Republicans, where we're just looking at issues like how to fill potholes, right? Infrastructure bills should not be partisan, but they have become that because instead of focusing on infrastructure, we focused on Green New Deal. And healthcare should be able to be bipartisan. We have got to figure out what's going on with Medicare and Medicaid. It is the way that it is right now is just not sustainable. We want to be able to provide for our future. We should be able to have these kind of contacts, these kind of discussions. But social media has made it really hard. But what you are seeing, I think, under the Trump administration, and why it may seem more chaotic now, what you are seeing is how the sausage is made. It's not pretty, but this is what transparency looks like. When we are trying to get together this one big, beautiful bill, and you've got different members of the Republican Party that are going to the media and saying, look, I want more salt. I want to get rid of the cap. And you've got others saying, we need to have corn subsidies in Iowa. This is what it looks like. You got 435 of us representing 435 very distinct districts. We all have different people that come to us and have different needs. I can never get my two kids to decide what they want for dinner. And yet you want to have 435 of us that represent about 750,000 people all agree? It's not going to happen. But this is what debate looks like. It's ugly, but at the end of the day, I am hopeful we were able to get a bill out of the House that everybody said we couldn't get it done, especially not done by Memorial Day. We did it. And I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to get it out of the Senate and to the President's desk by July 4th.
Congresswoman, people who listen to our show regularly know that I occasionally, I don't even know Mike Johnson, but I occasionally say maybe he deserves more credit than he gets. Now, you're from Texas.
Texted him. I'm like, you couldn't pay me to do your job.
Well, I won't compare him to Sam Rayburn because these Texans will rise up. But does he get some of the credit for this? How much?
I will tell you, I have never, ever seen a more hardworking man. And I think because of his demeanor, he is a very faith-based rock. He is very diplomatic, but he is also very articulate. And I first even started talking to Mike Johnson when I first got elected, and we were talking about the Electoral College votes, and he got up there and he debated in a very articulate manner why it was constitutional to be able to vote against the Electoral College votes. And that was something that was being debated back and forth in our own conference passionately. But the way that he has handled himself and brought everyone to the table, no Congress member can say that they have not had a voice. that they have not given an opportunity to be at the table, to be listened to put forward their concerns, their demands in some cases. But what he has not done is done this behind people's backs. He's not cut side deals. He's been very, forthright. He's got the backing of his president, who has definitely helped him, to be able to put some of the votes on the table that might not have been there in the past. But I think he deserves a tremendous amount of credit, and God bless him, because he never sleeps. When we had that 19-hour-long markup in Ways and Means, and we were trying to figure out what the cap was going to look like, literally at 2 o'clock in the morning, he is in the back room after having met with various factions of our conference all day. And then he was out there that morning. So I think he's one of the hardest working people in D.C.
All right. Well, we are going to have to leave it there. Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne from the 24th Congressional District of Texas. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right. We are going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Carl Cannon. We are broadcasting from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley at the first annual Reagan National Economic Forum, and we are pleased to be joined by David Trulio. He is the president and CEO of the Ronald Reagan Foundation.
Presidential Foundation
and Institute.
It's great to be here, and thank you for being here. It's an important voice, and really just great that you're here.
The turnout's been fantastic. It's been a great event so far, so congratulations.
Thank you. It's important for us as a foundation, but more important, it's important for the country, because if we don't have economic strength, nothing else matters ultimately.
So our first three guests were Texans, which seemed incongruous. We're at the Ronald Reagan Library, but David Trulio is a Californian like me. But I was thinking about that because when Reagan became president, he chose a Texan as his vice president and shocked the whole world by choosing that man's best friend and chief of staff, James Baker, as his chief of staff. So there's a California-Texas connection and
take
competition.
It to a higher level.
Yeah, please
well,
do.
Jim Baker, by the way, just turned 95, so God bless him. We are in the Air Force One Pavilion, and just a matter of steps from here, there's a bas-relief plaque of T. Boone Pickens. And without T. Boone Pickens, this place literally would not, this Air Force One Pavilion literally would not exist. So the impact and influence of Texas is everywhere, and where would we be without Texas?
Yeah. I did see that plaque, by the way, as I walked in. All right, Dave, so you conducted a survey on sort of economic issues and matters, and one of the things that jumped out to me was and we've been talking a lot about partisanship and Congress and their ability to do things in a sort of bipartisan way, was the difference of opinion about whether more regulation or less regulation was needed. And it varies pretty dramatically whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Tell us a little bit about that. And did that surprise you, or is that pretty much exactly what you might have expected?
There were some surprises, which I'd love to get into, but in terms of partisan split, we saw what I think is kind of stereotypical or kind of what anyone might, myself included, might assume around regulation and energy abundance, right? So Americans are pretty evenly split when it comes to approaches to energy, but there's a tremendous partisan division there. So Republicans believe in energy abundance by a 3-to-1 margin. Democrats prefer energy sufficiency by a greater than 2-to-1 margin, right? So people go into their partisan corners there. On regulation, if asked if America needs more or has too much regulation, Americans are split. So 2/3 of Republicans believe, surprise, we have too much regulation, and 3/4 of Democrats we need more.
We need more.
But there are a couple of things that grab me, if you'll indulge me.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Because there's one thing I want to ask you about in that survey too.
great. So we hear a lot about how Americans are divided, but there are some fundamental areas of agreement in the survey, which to me actually pleasantly surprised me. So an overwhelming majority of Americans, 76%, believe, as President Reagan believed, that, quote, government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. And that included a majority of Democrats, independents, and Republicans, right? So what does that say?
That's the one I wanted to ask you about. Let's bore down on that. 90% of Republicans agreed with the statement, but 60% of Democrats and
not what I expected.
And 3/4 of independents. So what does that makes me wonder that those other questions in there, do we need more energy? more regulation. Those have sort of become subsumed in partisan issues that people are thinking about. But this cosmic view of Reagan's that government can't help us get out of our problems, overwhelming majorities agree. What is
Fascinating.
that? So what do we do with that?
Well, I think it's a call to action for leaders. Look, it's tough out there. Americans are stretched financially. There's questioning of the American dream, right? Try buying a house, especially in California, right? But in any kind of big city environment, it's tough out there. I think people, there's a sense of frustration there. I think some of the numbers may reflect some parts of the survey group maybe not being happy in terms of who's running Congress or who's in the White House and so
I
on.
was just going to say, how much of that is Donald Trump? The
Well,
Democrats
but when you've got 76% saying government's the problem, it's much bigger than any one thing.
Yep.
So that really grabbed me. I think another thing that on a different topic, but was also striking, is that an overwhelming majority, 86% support a free trade agreement with countries in Asia. So think Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam to counter China, right? So 86%, and that included 87% of Donald Trump voters, right? So this notion that somehow America first is America alone is actually not borne out by the data. And I think as we look at the challenges the country faces, especially in the context of fierce global competition, geostrategic competition, as well as economic competition with China, certainly the American people we surveyed believe, at least when it comes to Asia, that partnerships and trade matter a lot.
One of the other areas of bipartisanship in the survey was concern about AI. Seems across the board, and we talk a lot about AI on our show, and Carl's convinced that it's Skynet and going to destroy the human race. So you'd be included in that group, right?
Yeah.
But what should we be doing to assuage concerns about AI? What should the government be doing? We're not. It seems like it's proceeding at a rapid pace, and it's something that Americans have concerns about, but maybe aren't fully informed
It's
about.
a huge issue, a mega issue. It's been coming up a lot for obvious reasons over the course of the discussions today. I'll answer the question directly in a moment, but in terms of the data, what it showed us, half of Americans, so 51%, are concerned about what AI means for them and their families. Interestingly, maybe not surprisingly, digitally native Americans are significantly less likely to be concerned, right? So it's about 41 to 42% concerned. So if you're my age or older, you're worried about what AI is going to do to you. I think one of my takeaways from thinking about this and from the discussions today is we have to just embrace it and get with the program and figure out how to make the most of it, right?
I think
Our
we should.
competitors
I think
are
we
not
should
gonna say
kill it
that.
in its crib and strangle it and then drown it.
That ship sailed, unfortunately. But the reality is AI is here. So do we leverage it, right? I mean, I'm sure it was, if you were in the horse and buggy industry in 1890, the rise of the automobile was very scary, right? But you just have to embrace it and make the most of it.
So what? All right, I'm going to ask you the question you get and probably hate. What would Ronald Reagan think of Donald Trump?
Well, the first thing is we don't know what he would say because he's no longer with us. But when it comes to economics, think of the core policies, right? Low taxes, keeping regulation in check, keeping a regulatory burden low, right? Working to keep interest rates in a place where inflation doesn't hurt the American people. So whenever we see as a foundation policies that leverage those principles, such as, there's certainly elements of that in the One Big Beautiful Bill, we will cheer that, and the American people will be the beneficiaries, right? I do think it's really neat that the official portrait of Ronald Reagan that was in the main part of the White House was moved in by President Trump into the Oval Office, right? So that's pretty cool. And on President Reagan's birthday back in February, President Trump issued a birthday proclamation. So it's a neat thing to see that interplay between the 40th and the 45th president.
All right. Well, we are going to
And 47th president. But
have to leave it there for now. But again, congratulations on a great first event, and we appreciate your time today.
thank you, and thanks for being here. It really means a lot. Appreciate it.
David Trulio, he's the president and CEO of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. I got it right. And that's going to do it for us. So on behalf of Carl, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RealClearPolitics. You've been listening to RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.